Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I do hope it finds you well. My name is John, and I am an author, and I'm coming to you here today on another Storytime Thursday to read the seventh chapter of my first book, The Shadow of the Past. So sit back, grab a cup of tea or coffee or wine if you're watching this in the evening and that's your thing, and we will jump in. Chapter 7, The Final Mediation. As Val'inar dwelt upon how he could possibly mediate a dispute of such magnitude, the miles passed, and the winding tunnels slowly began to climb upwards. Mediate was much nearer the surface of the mountains than Drashtar. Although they mined and did much work underground, the Crel'van Goblins preferred to live upon the surface of the mountains. Mediate was little more than a large meeting chamber that was situated between a major dwarven mining encampment and a goblin fort that lay directly above it. The company stopped at the encampment the night before the meeting was to commence. While they had traveled, Narthan had done what he could to educate Val'inar about the goblins. They called themselves Crel'van and had lived in the western third of the Orthrus Mountains for as long as the Graphic dwarves had lived in the east, perhaps longer. They had several large cities and some sophisticated mining works. Their capital was called Matra, a bustling city built around an ancient tower of the same name that was of goblin design, although rumor reported that they had long since lost the secret of how to enter it. The Crel'van were led by a slowbrag or dread lord named Brawl, who ruled with almost total authority, save for the Uxra Council. The Uxra were a group comprised of clan leaders and the most powerful Lug'zar, which translated to fire throwers. Narthan also revealed that they would likely be dealing with a Lug'zar named Urgar. Val'inar gleaned from these conversations that the conflict between dwarf and goblin in recent years was largely over mining territory, but the conflict had recurred so often and for so long that neither side could remember where the bad blood between them had originated, or whose fault it was, although both blamed the other. What was clear was that both sides deeply distrusted each other. It also seemed that the most recent version of the conflict stemmed from the desire of the goblins to mine a vein of iron which ran from goblin territory to well into dwarf territory. The goblins claimed the right to mine it because they discovered it, and the dwarves claimed it because it existed in what had long been their realm. The Graphic and Crel'van had warred twice over the issue in the previous 5 decades, as both sides tried to expand their resources. Both conflicts had ended with little for either side except for loss of life. The recent flare up had been going on for a year, and both sides were mobilizing their full armies, determined to keep what they viewed as theirs. The anxiety Val'inar felt from not knowing how he could possibly prevent a war between two races so strongly opposed to one another grew stronger the closer they got to Mediate. It got to the point where Val'inar found himself unable to sleep in the dwarven encampment of Kadan the night before the meeting. They were housed in a cramped barracks room. Although he tried to put a good face on it out of respect to his hosts, the fact that he had not seen the sky in nearly a week was not helping his nerves much either. You yearn for the stars, don't you? An elf born to the forest does not belong beneath the ground, highborn. Val'inar jumped up upon hearing this. He looked frantically around the room and was about to call out a challenge when he realized that his ears had heard nothing. The voice, like the roar of a fire, had resonated from within him. After he had collected his thoughts a moment, he looked within him and saw the area of fire vibrating as if with a presence. Very good. You have learned much for one without the benefit of training. Val'inar focused his mind upon the glowing and crackling heat of the area and projected his thoughts into it. You are the Lady of Fire which I was bidden to find. I am Shiniri, and since you know who I am, I assume that Meramas has been in contact with you. You are correct, lady. He bade me seek out those like him, so I might gain knowledge and perhaps aid to fight the malevolence that plagues this world, in Ushara, who is its master or its servant. That is most ambitious, and a task that could easily get you killed, and yet you do not hesitate. If Maramas is correct, and I am the one with the best hope of stopping it, so therefore I must try. If you are really willing to try, regardless of the cost, then perhaps you can save us. I have some questions for you then. This is not the time for such things. My power is weakened to the point where I find even this simple conversation conducted over short distance taxing. Come to Matra, the great city that once ruled these mountains, and we can converse in person. I cannot just walk into goblin territory on my own. Besides, I gave my word that I would help negotiate between the goblins and the dwarfs. Ah, yes, the war that has time and again consumed these mountains. It would certainly be best for everyone's sake if they did not go to war at such a time. I agree, but how am I possibly going to resolve this situation? I know nothing about diplomacy. I will aid you. Will that not tax your strength further? There will be several fires lit in that room. I will have somewhat more power there than I do here. Thank you. Your help might make all the difference. So full of hope, said the voice fading away within him. Having thus been reassured, Val'inar fell into a deep slumber soon after the conversation had finished. He was awakened early the next morning by Narthan, and after eating a full breakfast, they began the long climb up spiraling staircases and steep slopes that took them to Medial. The journey took them nearly an hour, and they found that the goblin delegation had already arrived. Arrived at last, sneered the lead goblin in the trade language. Do you dirt dwellers get lost in your own tunnels? The speaker was short for a goblin standing only 4 feet off the ground, but appeared shorter still because he stood with shoulders and his head thrust forward. He had long but strong-looking arms folded across his chest, with well-groomed and sharp nails upon the end of his 4-fingered hands. He had a short nose, looking like it had been repeatedly broken, and bulging yellow eyes. His head was large in comparison to his body, with long ears stretching backward from his face. His reddish-brown skin was wrinkled and leathery. He wore a tunic of red cloth and a vest of leather. His feet were shod by the particular leather sandal favored by goblins. He had a silver belt upon his waist and a short sword in it and steel shoulder guards. He bore a pendant around his neck with a large ruby set within a golden flame, signifying his title as Lug'zar. "We are on time, rusted one," retorted Narthan, "and we accept no responsibility if you arrived here early." As he said this, the dwarven guards advanced cautiously on the goblins, and after a tense moment, both sets of guards took up alternating positions around the room. What manner of creature is this that you bring here, dwarf?" asked the goblin in his nasal voice. "Is this some trick you seek to play, or just an insult?" "No tricks, goblin," barked Narthan. "This is Val'inar, an elf of balance, as he names his people, who has come at the request of myself and Lord Irtil to try to resolve this matter before it becomes war." "Is this how your petty lord seeks to start a war?" asked the goblin, edging towards anger. "By offering a mythic being as a mediator? Our oldest stories speak of such creatures, but that is all they are, stories." "Petty lord," fumed the dwarf. "Now who is being insulted? Light the fires in the room. Do it now." Val'inar raised his hand and set a blast of fire to each of the 2 hearths on the opposite ends of the room. This action momentarily shocked the arguers into submission, but only for a moment. "Simple tricks," scoffed the goblin. "Is that the best you can do to convince me that you are a creature from legend? You really do mean to start a war, don't you?" "My aim is not war, but peace," replied the elf. "This war must not occur." "And what if it is our wish that it occur?" observed the goblin. Even if you won the war, it would still devastate your people for decades, said Val'inar, sighing. Is that really a price you want to pay in order to satisfy an old blood feud? Is a vein of iron worth so much trouble? Do not presume to tell me the business of my own people, replied the goblin, now angered. Even if you are one of the highborn, what business is it of yours what the Crel'van do? Make them sit down. You will accomplish nothing while their tempers are rising. Sit down, barked Val'inar, holding both the goblin and Narthan with a piercing gaze for a few seconds, until they did as he commanded. The guards all took a step forward, but hesitated as they had not been given orders by their shocked leaders. Your anger and pride will profit these negotiations as little now as it has in the past. You will at least hear me out. To so treat myself and the dwarf for their guards present shows either great courage or great foolishness, laughed the goblin. You may call me Urgar. I am Lug'zar of the Crel'van. Speak then, as you seem to so insistent to do so. So why must we not go to war? I realize that the feud between your races goes back many generations, began Val'inar. But what are you really fighting over? Both of you are making ridiculous demands of each other, though both your party peoples would still gain much advantage from this new vein, even if shared. The high words of a dreamer, snorted the goblin. You know nothing about this situation and are in no position to judge it. Their anger is tapping into the malevolence, whether they know it or not, and you will not overcome that directly. Instead, redirect it. Okay, so I do not understand your conflict, but think of how easy you will make the desire of the Union to subdue all, said Val'inar. The Union is far away, Urgar shot back. Besides, they promised us aid even if we did not join. They promised us assistance too, grunted Narthan, in solving our old problems. Val'inar sighed in obvious annoyance, and would this conflict have even come to this point if it were not for the malevolence that poisons the air? We know of this strangeness of which you speak in the Thage, nodded Urgar in deep thought. There is some power behind it and is connected in some manner or another to the Union. Why should we trust you? Sneered the goblin after a moment's thought, waving a dismissive hand. You have given us little evidence to support this claim. Both seemed to have a reaction when the other revealed that they had been given aid by the Union. Both kings despise being used. Play upon that. You have both said that you have received aid from the Union, reminded Val'inar, and you both indicated an encouragement to solve your problems. Are you really going to be taken in that easily? The Union clearly wants you to go to war so that they may conquer you all the more easily when they finally decide to. They have tricked you with promises of assistance into renewing an old feud. You may have found the mark, boomed Narthan. There is certainly something strange about the Union's dealings. The dwarf, Narthan, has a point, mused Urgar. Perhaps the Union is a threat that has cloaked itself in good intentions. But we cannot just let this conflict die. Too much has been said and done for that. The Union has promised both of you aid in staking your claim, and with your anger thus stoked, you are tapping into this malevolence, and thus are being driven into greater anger and pride. You are being used, said Val'inar firmly. That still leaves the question of the mind open, though, rumbled the dwarf. And perhaps it would be best if that excuse for war is removed from the table. Say as I say. What if I can give you more than you thought you would gain from this? What if I thought I can give you more than you thought you could gain from this, said Val'inar slowly. What do you mean by that, Val'inar? Barked Narthan. I can provide you with ancient treasure that would benefit you greatly, said Val'inar. For the goblins, I can give them a detailed study of all ores and gems in the part of Orthrus they controlled, several plans for ancient machines, and the Stone of Flames. For the dwarf, I can give the same study for their parts of the Orthrus, a better way to make steel, and the axe of King Murtzel. Both goblin and dwarf stood speechless for a short time before either of them managed to speak. It was Urgar who recovered first. And where did you come upon such great treasures? I do not have them yet, but I will retrieve them for you from the fortress of Matra, remarked Val'inar. That isn't possible, snorted the goblin, glaring from Narthan to Val'inar. He took several deep breaths before saying hesitantly, We do not say this before outsiders, but even we cannot enter the fortress. I can, replied Val'inar simply. How? Snarled Urgar. How can an elf enter a fortress that denies entrance to its old builders? My skills are many, said the elf. I can find my way through the magical protection. We'll give my dogs a minute, and I'll give myself a minute to recover my voice. I never realized quite how hard it was to do voices, honestly. My dogs think they're part of the fire department. Oh! Hi. Yeah, I know. I howled too. Out. Come on. Give me a minute. Give me a minute. All right. All right, pretty puppies. Anyway, my skills are many, said the elf. I can find my way through the magical protections. All right, said Urgar after a moment pondering. I will grant you leave to... Hey, get your head out of that. Go. All right, said Urgar after a moment pondering. I will grant you leave to travel to Matra so you may retrieve what you promised. Be warned, fail to return with what you have promised, or at any sign of treachery, and you will die. I will remain here with Urgar, grunted the dwarf, and see if we can hammer out some kind of treaty, or at least a truce between our people. There's much left to be worked out, some of which no amount of gain will ease. But I can say with certainty that if you are able to deliver what you promise, Lord Irto will agree to a truce, or at least while the threat of the Union remains. Urgar hastily wrote 2 notes and handed both of them to a pair of his guards, who had just stepped forward. After whispering some hurried instructions to them in their own tongue, he turned to Val'inar. These guards will take you to our capital, where you will meet Slowbrag Brawl before you enter Matra. Travel quickly and return here once you are done, and do not forget that you shall die if this is some form of trick. Well done, Val'inar, well done. Now come, as we have much to discuss. All right, that is chapter 7. I hope you enjoyed that. My dog seemed to have. I hope you enjoyed another Storytime Thursday. I'd like to once more encourage you. My 2 books are available, linked below, The Shadow of the Past and In the Sun Burned Red. I'd also love to hear your comments and feedback. What are your thoughts on the chapter I just read? My voices, my dog's howling abilities, my howling abilities, and just in general what you thought of what you heard. Also, like, share, subscribe, tap the notification bell if there is one. And just in general, I'd follow my socials, my website, all of that is linked below. I do hope you all have a wonderful day and get the chance to do or experience something creative, and I will catch you on the next one.